I started at the Current in 1983 as the calendar editor in my freshman year, and through that experience, loved it, and started to do other reporting, and had some other positions, including associate editor in my junior year, and then I was editor of the Current in 1986, 1987.
Cool.
Yeah, there was a calendar section in the Current that basically focused primarily on events happening on campus. If there was an event like right around the area or an event the university was involved in, we would include that, but it was in the feature section, and we tried to do it like a week or two out so that people could see what was coming up, you know, within a week or two. That way, if they were interested in a film series on campus or a lecture, if a famous person was coming on campus to do a lecture, but just a way to engage students in campus activities. I think the biggest challenge was the campus was starting to really grow in that time frame. Chancellor Barnett had just come to campus and really was making some major inroads into fundraising and reaching out to corporations and fundraise. So the campus had this sort of small commuter feeling, sort of the stepchild of the system. Brawley, Kansas City, Columbia were the big campuses, and we always felt like we were sort of the stepchildren and weren't getting our full share. So when the new chancellor came, there was a lot of energy about growth, and so reporting that from a student newspaper perspective was challenging because we had major competition. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch and other media outlets were really interested in the new chancellor and what she was doing. And a couple of times I scooped the Post. And they were actually a little miffed and actually called administration and said, how is your little student newspaper getting these big stories before us? And so it was a challenge, but it was also rewarding that we were able to really cover some very important stories, and I'm very proud of those.
Yeah, that's great.
I had been an editor with my high school newspaper and yearbook and enjoyed it. And I wasn't quite sure if I wanted to go here a year or two and then transfer to Columbia and do journalism. So I knew they had a communications program, so I said, well, I'll start here. I can always transfer. And I said, well, let me check out the newspaper because I really enjoy that. And so I walked in, and Sharon Kabatsky was the editor, and she said, hey, we've got things to do. And they had this calendar thing they were doing and asked me if I was interested in that, and I said yeah. And so it was a great way to begin my, I was there on the Current staff for 4 years. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, good.
Well, I'm proud of the fact that we won several awards, and of course that's nice to win awards, and we got some really good awards, and that was rewarding. But I think it was the fact that we actually were reporting on stories at a very high level, especially we were really running stories that were going head-to-head with the Post-Dispatch and the Globe Democrat at the time. Our editorial team was really, really involved in what was happening in the campus, and we knew a lot about everything from sports to features, but our really news department was really, I'm not going to say it was investigative, but we were really getting some great information about what the new chancellor was doing, the new relationship she was building, and so we were really able to bring those stories not only to the campus, but often people were reading about what was happening on campus, again, not from the Post-Dispatch, but from the Current, and that was really fun. We had some issues that were pretty dramatic. We had the new chancellor, so there were all new initiatives taking place. We had a tough year in that there was some racial tension on campus. There had been, the Association of Black Collegians had built a symbolic shanty on campus, and it was around protest of the time of university investments in South Africa and apartheid, and so they did this shanty building. Well, it burned down, and so there was a lot of angst and concern about who did it and why it was done, and the paper wrote some editorials that not everyone agreed with, and so there was a lot of negativity on some folks on campus about what the paper said. So, it was a great great opportunity to learn how important, covering a story like that is. That we have stories that I would say we all have that are more fluff, and then we got really hard news, and that was really hard news. And so our staff learned about covering that type of an event, how important it was to make sure it was right, how important it was to write an editorial about it and have some thoughtful discussion, knowing that some people are not going to agree with what you say, and so you have to be able to respond then to the letters to the editor that come in, and to take all that and in a very grown-up journalistic way of you're going to learn out in the once you graduate out into the real world that you're going to have to deal with this sort of situation. So it was a great learning experience for the entire staff at that time.
And was that from the editorial board, or did that come from individuals, or do you remember?
Well, back in the day, we didn't have advisor. We didn't have any of that. We were our own organization, and so when we covered stories, when we wrote editorials, we did have an editorial board in terms of we had the senior editors would be at the table. I'm not sure how it is now. We'd have the features editor, the sports editor, and the editor, and the associate editor, whoever was at that senior table. And there was always interesting discussion then too about, is this something we all agree on or not agree? In several instances, you wouldn't get everyone to agree, but that's when the editor has to step forward and make those hard decisions about, we're going to move forward with this. So, it's a tough decision when you have a complicated matter that is probably going to have some people be upset. So I'm not saying it takes courage, but it definitely takes some thought so you know what you're getting into. I think in general, we always had a very active, and I think that whole time period, there was lots of letters to the editor. We would get them from faculty, we would get them from students, we would actually get them from community members who were interested in the campus. And so I think that dialogue was important. We're still, dealing with an atmosphere which was, only 87, but, the technology was very different, and it wasn't as easy to get a letter. People would send you a letter and you have to type it, and it sounds, to me it was like yesterday, but today it's so modern, you just get the letter electronically sent to you, and it's very fast. So we could have discussions in the paper about things that may have happened within a month or so versus a day or so. So it's just a little bit of a delayed response, and I think but that did engage conversation, and that's all good. So. Sure. I was on the track to go to UMSL for a few years, transfer to Columbia, go to J school, do all that. And once I hit campus and got involved, I was like, well, it's still the University of Missouri. It's just got to say St. Louis versus Columbia. I don't have to worry about where am I going to live and how do I make more money. So I was able to work here in St. Louis full time. I had several jobs that I worked, and I was able to pay for my own school and live at my parents' house and save money there. And so I decided that the Current would give me just as much experience as if I had tried to go to Columbia and try to get on their student newspaper. So the fact that I was able to be involved in the university, I got to know all the chancellors well, Chancellor Groveman, Chancellor Barnett, and Chancellor Toohill. And personal relationships would allow me to cover big stories, as well as to become more savvy with my business skills, because it was a business. As anyone who's been editor of the Current knows, you've got to deal with sales, you've got to deal with advertising, you have to deal with editorial. So you're learning all of those facets of what it takes to run a newspaper. So I was like, well, why would I leave this really great experience to gamble on going to Columbia where I may not have access to all this? So within 2 years, I was sold. I was going to stay in St. Louis. I was going to continue with the Current, and I'm glad I did. Chancellor Groveman was great. I got to know him because he began his announcement of retiring, and so I really was interested in making sure that the newspaper covered that transition, but also just to get to know him a little bit better. So I asked to do some interviews with the chancellor and his wife, and so I became more friendly with them. They invited me to the house several times for dinner. I did some really good interviews about their life and what they felt they had accomplished, and really became, as a young journalist, enamored with the fact they would take time to spend with me. And so during the transition, I got to know them, and then after they left, they moved to a loft at the city, which was very edgy at the time, and they invited me over to have dinner and to catch up on what they were doing post-retirement. And so I really enjoyed that experience because I felt that he understood what I was doing was really documenting his tenure, and that he respected that I was interested in that as a young person. And so I thought that was really great. And then when the new chancellor came, Chancellor Barnett, I was very aggressive in being right there to be involved in covering the search for her position. The university president at the time, C. Peter McGrath, actually allowed me to cover the transition. He allowed for me to, actually, one of the few interviews he gave about the search, he gave to the Current, and wrote a very extensive article, and then he and I got to know each other. And so I would go to Columbia, and so not only would the Columbia press go, what is the St. Louis guy doing here? We kind of became more friendly about, well, he's the president of the university of all the campuses, so it makes sense to have a reporter not just from Columbia there, but from St. Louis as well. So that was another good experience. The new chancellor, Chancellor Barnett, was dynamic. She was energetic. She respected the student journalism field. She respected the fact that we really did want to cover her every move because it was really fascinating to see all the things she was doing. And so I developed a really good relationship with her over the years. Actually, she wrote my letter of recommendation for grad school at St. Louis U. It was sad to see her leave when she left, and very saddened by her very untimely young death. It was very heartbreaking, but I consider the next chancellor who came as the permanent chancellor after Chancellor Barnett, Chancellor Toohill, is a personal friend today. I saw her last week. We had dinner. Chancellor Toohill gave me a love of history. She really taught me, that history matters, and that was one of her fields of expertise. And so, over the years, she's been a mentor to me and a friend. And I just wrote a new book, and I included her as a mentor in my acknowledgments, and really thank her for really, she took what Chancellor Barnett did and just built upon it. Obviously a lot of people may not know her. They know the name of the Toohill Art Center, and that's an example of her commitment to this campus. And she went out and knocked on every door in town to get this thing built. And so it's very nice that it's named after her because she deserves that honor. Fondest memory of the Current would just being here all night, because we were in the old Blue Metal building, and for all those that know about that, it wasn't very nice. You guys, I'm happy that you guys have a nice space here, and this whole building is great. But the fact that we would just be up all night, and we could, we would sleep, on the floor. We'd sleep. I think we maybe had a couch. I don't even remember now, but we would stay up all night, and then we go to class the next morning. Sometimes we would be here. If it's production day, you could be here 24, 48, 30, whatever many hours, because the technology was just so different, and you actually had to cut out the paper and paste it on the board. It was just so, like I said, it seems like yesterday. And now I would hope that the students who are working on the paper now realize how important it is that they can turn things so quickly to get, because we weren't able to always cover breaking news because we just didn't have the capacity. So just being up all night, it was a family environment. Everyone, we were like best friends, and all of us, really enjoyed what we were doing, but we also loved this campus and loved what we were doing. And so it was a family, and I'm hoping it still is that way here at the Current.
Yeah.
I think at the time I was editor, the campus was still a commuter feel, so we didn't have the student housing, we didn't have the student center, we didn't have a lot of these activities where the campus was alive all the time. In the evening, campus would be very quiet, and peaceful. And so at the time, the current group, you know, we had each other, and so we would do things. We'd go to dinner, we'd go to each other's house, we would do lots of social things. So it was like our own fraternity. I didn't join a fraternity, so I consider the fraternity of my college days here.